I love talking about David, and I don't mean me. I'm talking about this David from history, about 3,000 years ago, about 1,000 years before Jesus showed up. He was the king of Israel, and he was truly the best king that Israel ever had. There's so much to his life, and we've only dealt with a portion of it. And today, we're going to deal with some stuff that's pretty heavy. I hope, especially guys, I hope you'll have your heart and your mind open to what I have to tell you today, because a lot of times we think we've got it figured out, and we know we don't. But we don't want to let anybody else know that. Amen. Yep. But I'm just telling you, God is big enough and strong enough that you can trust Him even when you don't know what you're doing. He's got you. And ladies, that applies to you too, but I don't know how you think as much as I do all my brothers. So we're going to be wrapping this up. He is the shadow king. He gives us glimpses. He gives us premonitions of what Jesus is going to be like. If you go and look, and some of you will actually do some study on this, you can go look up how many times the name and the reference to King David shows up in the New Testament, because as we'll see in the Light of the World series, that is crucial for us to understand who Jesus truly is and what He came to do. So we're wrapping up what I talked about from the beginning, and that is, I think this is a series that's very appropriate for type A, very driven people. So if you know anyone who missed this, you can reference them to the Church Center app and go to the archives and pick up on all these messages. I think they are very beneficial to people who are driven. There's something in there for somebody who's in their teens, somebody who's in their 20s. Certainly we're going to look into how many of you are seasoned citizens. See, I don't even have to say what the date is. You just know what that is. And if you're like me as a seasoned citizen, you know that there are things that you have dreamed about all your life, and you have some opportunities still left, but you also know that there's more behind you than is in front of you. And you don't always know what to do with that. And I'm here to tell you, I came to tell you what you're supposed to do with that. And any of you who are not seasoned citizens, who have some smarts about you, you will take notes on what I have to say, because Lord willing, you'll be there too. And you will need this. Y'all ready? David has shown us when it's time to run. He's shown us when it's time to stand. He showed us when it's good to listen. He showed us when it's time to speak up and how to trust God. What I've noticed, and I certainly did not have any of the things that have happened in our community over the last few days. I did not know any of that was going to happen when I put these notes together, but it just serves to remind that life rarely goes as you have it planned. Any of the seasoned or halfway seasoned citizens, you go, well, I made really good plans and it still fell apart. Yep. If those of you who do not know, we had a simple traffic violation that turned into the loss of a dear friend of many, and also one of our law enforcement. I mean, the same individual. Senseless stuff. He's gone, and that throws a complete curveball that we don't know what to do with. So much sorrow. I have a lot of friends who are in law enforcement, and they're hurting right now, so would you pray for them? And also pray for all the people who are in law enforcement that are turning to try and help their law enforcement brothers and sisters. Because this is a great time to be of ministry, be of comfort and service to those in our community. At the same time, I also know, and he happens to be here today, one of my friends got a diagnosis that the widowmaker artery on his heart was 85% shut. But you know, being a good, rough and tough kind of guy, he was out in the field until he got that done, and then he went to the ER. Some of you have gotten even tougher diagnoses than that. And you don't want to sit in that little room where the doctor says, well, I need to tell you some things. You don't know if you've got a few more days to spend with your mom or your dad, because you may take a trip and get calls. It's like you better come back. You work on solid plans thinking they're going to be good for you, good for the community, good for the people in your family. You make those plans, and then through no fault of your own, the economy literally falls out from beneath you, and you can't make those plans come together. Rarely does life go as we plan. Now, that's not to say that planning isn't great, because one of the wisest men who ever lived, Solomon, and then another very wise man, the half-brother of Jesus, his name was James, said you ought to plan. But you always ought to sign that letter with if the Lord wills. Plans are good, but reality is better. Well, by that I mean reality always wins. You have dreams. I don't know if you all know this about me, but my dream, whenever I was still dreaming fledgling dreams back in my teens, is I wanted to be the next Amy Grant. I know I don't look anything like her, but I'm just saying I wanted to sing, and I wanted to record, and then it kind of morphed into I wanted to be a record producer, and those dreams did not come true. They were good dreams. I wanted to honor God with all that. Some dreams don't come true because of decisions that we make, because sometimes we make decisions and we make them not knowing what the future holds, so we make the wrong decision or the unwise decision, and then it kind of cripples the dreams that we had. I will also say this, and we've dealt with it in a lot of different messages, and that is sometimes your dreams don't come true because of what other people do and what other people say and what other people try to do to sabotage what you're trying to do. I don't want this message to be a downer. I want it to be, this is where we live. If there's anything you need to know about me, is that I believe that faith, the real faith in Jesus Christ, in knowing Him and knowing that He is trustworthy, not religious feelings, not that, oh, I'm going to look really religious or I'm going to look really constipated because I believe in Jesus. I'm saying knowing Jesus, who He is, who He claimed to be, and what He did, I believe that it is vigorous. I believe that it's durable. I believe that it exists, and it makes a huge difference in everyday life, because I'm here to tell you, I've had enough conversations with some of you, you still play church. Yeah, Rock Springs is a different kind of church, and you like what you hear, or you like what you see, and you like the way that it makes you feel. But don't ever get all caught up in the methodology of a church. Just because people sing more hymns or they do things more formally does not make them more or less close to God. And just because this guy is not going to wear a tie unless I'm doing your wedding or your funeral, I'm just telling you, it doesn't make it better or worse in terms of what we do with Jesus. Because this is a gathering of people who are so messed up. I love you, but you're messed up. Amen. And I am too. We don't say it casually. All of us who can hear my voice either live or Memorex, we are a part of a colossal collection of moral foul-ups. You say, well, I'm not that bad. But you're still admitting that you're bad. You're not good enough to have a one-on-one relationship with the person of God who made you. Your life has purpose. But you won't understand that purpose until you know the one who made you. Like I said, I don't want this to be a downer, but it lives right smack dab in the middle of reality. Some dreams that you have in your life will not come true. I don't care how much you love Jesus. I don't care how fervently you pray. Some dreams won't come true. The two of you may not live happily ever after. What does that say about God? Some of you will not walk your daughter down the aisle. Some of you may never need a high chair. Your second marriage is starting to feel like your first one. And your prodigal may never come home. You may get the call that someone you love is tragically removed from your day-to-day. And no matter what you said, he may wind up marrying her anyway. Your parents may never get back together, and money might always be tight. The reason that sobers us up is because somewhere along the line we were either told or we seem to have picked up the impression that if I do good, then everything will be good. Anybody with me? You thought that at one point, didn't you? And then you got down that road a little bit further and you see people who are not good and they're doing all the good and you're wondering where your goods went. And then that's when you could write Proverbs or Psalms or Ecclesiastes or Jeremiah. And you say to God, people tell you you're not supposed to say things like this to God, and yet it's there in His Word. It's like, God, what's up? I'm serving you with everything I got. And that reprobate down the street is getting blessed. What is the matter with this picture? The reason we got to look at that and examine it and go, yeah, maybe I did, is because somewhere deep inside of that is tucked this seed that's like God owes you something. And that is a very bad attitude to have, I'm just telling you. Because God doesn't owe you anything. He doesn't owe me anything. It's like, yeah, you're a preacher. Well, he for sure doesn't owe me anything. You say, God promised me. We often extrapolate a lot of things that God said to other people as promises that belong to us. And you've got to be very careful about that. One of the things he said is, I am who I say I am, and I will do what I said I will do. And that is, if you come to me humbly, I will save you. I'm just telling you, if you are with me and you are in sync with me today, you can look around and see that everybody else's dreams are coming true, and it feels like God granted them your wish. So the question has to be asked, what do we do when our dreams do not come true? Like I said, in David's 20s, David's dreams and David's dreams and God's promises seemed like they were doing okay, and then they got undermined by this guy who was out of his mind, and he was also king, and his name was Saul. So David panicked, people died. You can go back and listen to all the details of that. One of the things, if you will remember with me, one of the things that David took from that, the lesson that he carried forward in his life is, when you feel forsaken, you are mistaken. Because God has not forsaken you just because your circumstances have gone sideways. Please listen to me. He's like, I got to take a nap then. Okay, well, you write that down, what I just told you. When you feel forsaken, you are mistaken. You take that with you. That is something you can actually build your life on in your relationship with God. Then David becomes king. He gets anointed as king. He becomes king. And then he undermines his own dreams. We don't have time to dwell on this, but it leaves us with a really important lesson. You know the story, but let me recap it. 22 years after he becomes king, he's now in his 50s. Instead of going and leading like he was designed to lead, he goes and sends his warrior companions into battle. And listen to me, men, listen to me. What I'm about to tell you is not saying that David was passive, because I've noticed this about myself and I've noticed it about a lot of you. Men don't like to be passive. It's like we need to do something. I'm not saying be passive in the middle of your crisis. I'm saying you wait on who the real king is and you follow his lead. But David did not put himself in that. He was not passive, though. He was not weak. He was fierce and highly motivated. But in his particular situation, he was like a stallion who has all this power and energy and ability to create and drive things forward. But he had bridled it under God's control, which is where it needs to be, fellas. He was still passionate. He was still strong. He was focused. And then all of a sudden he said, you know what? You guys go fight the battles. I'm just going to stay here. And when he did that, he actually took control of his own life back into his own hands, like you and we tend to do. And if you will be honest, when you take control back into your own hands, do things usually go really, really well because you're smart and 10 feet tall, bulletproof, and you're all that in a bag of chips? No. He goes up on the roof of his house, looks down on the roof of another house. He sees a friend of his wife, she's bathing. None of his business. But he made it his business, and he wanted what he saw, and he was the king, and sometimes he would say, it's good to be the king. He sends for her. Those of you who got the gold star in Sunday school, tell us her name. Her name's Bathsheba. Yep. Her husband's name was Uriah. He sent for her. And it's interesting to note, whenever Israel got started as a nation, they didn't have a king. God said, I will be your king. I am the true king. And then they got real fussy, and then they said, we want a king, just like everybody else. We want to do what everybody else is doing. So God gives them Saul and then David. But he had warned them, he said, when you get a king, you have to remember, with a king comes the fact that you can't say no to a king. So he sends for Bathsheba. She comes over, stays the night, probably stayed more than one night. He gets her pregnant, then he panics, and then he defaults to his old habits of trying to control all the outcomes. Only now, whenever he's the king, and remember this, fellas, success is way harder to manage than failure. Now that he's got all the success, he's got more levers and buttons. He can do all kinds of stuff. So he orders her husband, Uriah, to be isolated in battle. Uriah dies in combat. David marries Bathsheba. David thinks, all good. Nobody's the wiser. Look how noble I am. I'm now going to raise Uriah's kid. But let me just tell you something, and I know this both from experience, and you do too. Everybody knew what he was doing because walruses have ears. And slaves talk. And that's when the pastor made a friendly neighborhood visit. Pastor Nathan stopped by and confronted him with a story about some sheep and all this other kind of stuff, and he snuck that in. And whenever he told the end result of this story, it explodes in David's heart. And David, this is the thing that we always come back to, David allowed the law of God to break him in that moment. He wasn't going to play any more games. But just like with you and me, sin always comes prepackaged with a lot of consequences. So I'm reading from 2 Samuel and talking about David's life. Nathan says, this is what the Lord says is going to happen out of this whole mess that you have made. Out of your own household, I'm going to bring calamity on you. It's going to explode. It's going to go sideways. And God says, you did all of this in secret, but I will do this thing I'm going to do in broad daylight before all Israel. And David said to Nathan, this is the kind of attitude that God applauded in David. He said, I've sinned against the Lord. I'm going to call a spade. That's what that is. And Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. You're not going to die because of this. 10 years go by. It just gets so bad. It gets so bad. 10 years go by. David's firstborn, his name is Amnon. He's supposed to be the future king, and yet he is consumed with lust, sexual lust for his half-sister Tamar. And so Amnon pretends to be sick. He's got a plan. You can read it, and he's got a plan. But he plans all this. He pretends to be sick and invites her over and say, would you please take care of me? He plans all of this so that he can attempt to seduce her. And she resists. In 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 12 and following, Tamar says, no, my brother, do not force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she was, he raped her. And then Amnon hated her with an intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. And Amnon had the audacity to say, get up and get out. You think you have dysfunction in your family. Everybody's got dysfunction in their family. David is still king. This is his number one son. David finds out. He is furious. Of course he's furious. This is wrong. But he doesn't do anything. He does nothing in regards to this. So Absalom, another one of his sons, who happens to be Tamar's actual brother, he takes her in. Well, that's very noble of him. And then he doesn't do anything. for 2 years. Until one day, because he's been making a plan, he throws this big party for all the king's sons, and he gets Amnon good and drunk so that his men, Absalom's men, can actually murder Amnon. And once that's done, Absalom flees north into Syria. David is furious. And again, he does nothing. After 3 years, David does invite Absalom to come back to Jerusalem. I'm not going to hurt you, just come on back. But then he gets him back in town, and David refuses to have an audience with him. He refuses to visit with his own son. 2 years go by. Absalom, cut from the same cloth as David, gets fed up. He is up to here with this kind of attitude. So he goes to David's number one military guy. His name was Joab. He burns General Joab's crops, who happened to have his crops right next to Absalom's crops. He burns his crops to get Joab's attention. And whenever Joab comes out to put out the fire, he said, "What are you doing, man?" And in 2 Samuel 14, it says, "I did that because I want to see the king's face. I'm tired of doing this through Facebook. I want to talk to him." And they meet. They meet face to face. But Absalom is still hurt. And there's one thing that is true 3,000 years ago all the way up to today, and that is hurt people hurt people. And he is hurting so bad, he's about to put some hurt on some people. So Absalom, being cut from the same cloth as David, he plots to replace David, and he sets himself, he just goes around the neighborhood outside of Jerusalem to go to everybody that's a part of all of Israel and all of Judah, and he says, "You know what? I'm going to replace my father, and the way I'm going to do it first is if you need good advice, I grew up in the king's household, you know how he is, well, I'm better than that, I'll give you good advice, I will be a judge." And it says in the context of this giving the history of David and Absalom, over time it says that Absalom stole the hearts of the people of Israel. He might not have had all the posters, but I'm just telling you, when Absalom spoke, people would listen. Y'all following with me here on this? He does this for 4 years because he's got a plan, and he is putting the plan into motion. In 2 Samuel chapter 15, it says, "Then Absalom was just moving on these things, God put this into motion. He sent secret messengers throughout all these tribes of Israel to say, 'As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then you say, Absalom is king in Hebron.'" We're about to have us a coup. Now, just stop and consider all this. Because these are real people going through real stuff, doing real stupid stuff like you and I do. You have to consider when this is happening. This is 16 years after Bathsheba and Nathan's conversation. And God says, "I know you did it in secret. I'm going to do it in public. But I am telling you, you will not be condemned because of your sin. But there's calamity coming." 16 years after the fact, David's world is coming unwound because his firstborn son has raped his daughter. His firstborn son is murdered by his favorite son, who ran, just like his dad did. And then this son instigates civil war against David. Literally. And this is the seasoned citizens with me. You look back on your life. Literally, you can feel what he's feeling as he's looking back on everything he has built. And it is flying off the wall. It's coming apart at the seams. And you and I know that panicky feeling is like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. This is one of those can it get any worse moments. And please, I'm begging you, if you're young, do not ask that question. Can it get any worse? Yeah, it can. In verse 13, a messenger came because this was all happening, the political espionage and all that. A messenger came and told King David, the hearts of the people of Israel are with your son Absalom. And then this is the kind of guy, this is the kind of brilliance he had in battle. David says to everyone who's around him, all the people, these are his levers, these are his buttons. David says to all his officials, all the people who are close to him, who are with him in the capital in Jerusalem, he said, come. What he said is, you need to pack something real quick because we've got to flee or none of us are going to be able to escape from Absalom. He said, what's about to happen, I've trained him. He knows the way. I'm just telling you, we got to leave immediately, he says, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin on us, and he will put the entire city to sword. So David abandons the throne in order to save the city. Once again, except this time, he's 61 years old. 61 years old whenever your life expectancy during that time period was very much not past 60. He is 61 years old and he is a fugitive again. And this was not the plan. This was not the expectation. This was not the way the dream was supposed to be. And then, I'm just telling you, I'm trying to speak to you. It's one thing to look at David, but if you are realistic, you go, and there we are. Mine's not quite as dramatic. I'm not written up in the Bible. But I look at the stuff that was supposed to be planned, and now I'm standing in the middle of all the pieces. I'm heartbroken. I am disappointed. And if I'm honest, I'm angry. And I'm telling y'all, I'm looking for somebody to blame. And if you've ever asked the question, where is God? Because I can't see him. I can't feel him. I don't sense that he is here. Where is God? If you've ever asked the point, what is the point? If you've ever asked the question, why should I even try? Then you're with me. Because you hung in there for him and he didn't come through. You waited on her, but for what? You raised him right, but what's the evidence? You were honest, you kept your nose clean, you worked hard. And everybody else got the promotion and you got laid off. I'm just telling you, I told you this all along. These are the moments when we make things worse. Because we get all bowed up and we're going to fix this situation. And then you come out with both guns blazing. And all it does is make it worse. We hurt ourselves. You heap on more regret. You heap on more debt. You look for things. You look for that thing that dulls the pain, and you find more pain relief. And yet, whenever the pain relief wears off, all you got is more pain. Now, the first time, whenever he was a young guy, when David fled the kingdom, that's when he took matters into his own hands. But in this particular situation, when he's 61, he's different. He is a different, more mature man now. And in 2 Samuel 15, verse 23, it says, the whole countryside heard what was going on. That he had said, everybody who's close to me, you pack up all your stuff. And the whole countryside there outside the capital wept aloud as all the people of David passed by. And pay attention to this, please. The king, David, went down the east side of the Temple Mount. The temple wasn't there then. But goes down the east side of the Temple Mount, and it is a steep ravine. It goes down to a brook called the Kidron Brook. And then up on the other side is the Mount of Olives. The king crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people who were with him moved on toward the wilderness, which was out toward the Dead Sea. And Zadok the priest was there too, and all the Levites who were charged with taking care of all the things that belonged to God. Zadok and the Levites were all with him, and they were carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God. If you don't know what that is, we'll talk about it another time, but suffice it to say, the Ark represented the very presence of God with them. And when they were taking it with them, whenever the Levites were doing it in the prescribed way, when they were taking it with them, what they were saying is, we are taking God to be in our midst, and we're also saying we believe that God is on our side. Now, you remember how David was when Saul had his pants down and the whole bit? Yeah, remember? Okay. And that he just felt there are just things you do not take into your own hands. You got to leave it to God. The Levites and Zadok are all carrying the ark and all that, and they were saying that God's on our side, but something about that felt manipulative to David. And so the king, David, turns to Zadok and he says, take the ark of God back. Take it back into the city. Y'all ready for this? Because to me, this is some of the most powerful stuff in the whole Old Testament. And if you get some age, if you get some maturity, if you get some perspective in your faith, perhaps you'll understand what he's saying. He says, take the ark of God back into the city. And he says, if I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back. And he will let me see that ark again. And I will be able to see his dwelling place again. But if he says, I'm not pleased with you, then I am ready. Just let him do to me whatever seems good to him. Men, you feeling what I'm putting down here? That's hard. That's real hard. Because this is what I've said in most of the messages. God's will, God's way, in God's time, that's a cute little statement. To live that way? It sounds a whole lot like another phrase that we, being on this side of Jesus, have heard before, and that is, he says, thy will, not my will. David in that moment lost his world, but he did not lose his confidence in God. Even though his circumstances were horrible, he still could see that God was good. And he chose not to abandon God even when the circumstances would lead him to believe that God had chosen to abandon him. David says, I'm not going to go to war with my son. I am not going to risk the city because this is not about me. God is in this place. And God will determine what happens to this. He will choose how and when I am replaced as king. I cannot take that back into my own hands. Anyway, we've got to pick up the story. Absalom takes the city with absolutely no resistance. But here's the thing. David is quite the warrior. David's departure from the city stole Absalom's ultimate victory because he wasn't after the city, he was after his dad. In other words, Absalom had taken the capital, but he had not taken the king. There's this guy, his name's Ahithophel. He was David's advisor. David told him to stay in the city. And when Absalom came rushing in, Ahithophel says to Absalom, you need to pursue your dad. You need to pursue David immediately before he can organize a proper defense because you know he's that good. David, being smart enough, he anticipated this, and he'd already asked another one of his guys, his name was Hushai, to go back in and to frustrate Ahithophel's advice. In 2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 7, Hushai replied to Absalom. He said, you know the advice that Ahithophel gave you? That advice that he gave you, that's not good. It's not good. It's not good this time. You know your father and you know his men, and they are fighters. They're as fierce as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. And besides, your father is an experienced fighter, and he will not spend the night with the troops. He said to Absalom, he says, even now he's hidden in a cave or some other place, and even the bravest soldier knows this, whose heart is like the heart of a lion. That brave soldier, his heart's going to melt with fear because all of Israel knows that your father is a fighter and that those who are with him are brave to the uttermost. So Hushai advised Absalom. He said, you need to gather all the tribes that are for you and lead the campaign yourself. And so Absalom takes his advice. David hides out in another city. I can't even pronounce it. I think it's Machanim. That was my best Hebrew. He says he hides out in that city, and he hears that Absalom's coming to get him, and now he has no other choice but to fight his own son. So David does what a great commander does. He divided the army into thirds, and then he gave commanders to each of those divisions. And he said, here are your explicit instructions. In 2 Samuel, verse 5 of chapter 18, he says, but I ask you to do this. Would you please be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake? That's my boy. And all the troops heard the king giving that order concerning Absalom to each of his commanders, so it wasn't a secret. David's generals insist that he remain behind so that he can remain in control. And he watches as all three of these generals and their divisions leave, and they're going out to confront Absalom and fight his son. Verse 6, and this is crucial. It says that the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. In other words, for those of you who love this kind of stuff, it's taken place where superior numbers mattered less than the experience of battle. Numbers didn't matter. Who's the best fighter? David's got 3 independent generals. Absalom is looking out for everybody. He is the point man. It goes on to say, there in that forest, Israel's troops were routed by David's men, and the casualties that day were great. 20,000 men died in this battle. And the battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword did. In the end, Absalom is caught and he's butchered by Joab. Absalom's army disbands, and David, being the father, mourns the death of his son. And I will just tell you, you can read it for yourself. David's biographers did not hide anything from us. They said it all along. They said it in this situation. David is flawed. He's just as screwed up as the next guy. But he never lost confidence in God. Even though he was messed up, he knew that God was not. Got to hurry this along. He returns to Jerusalem. He's still the king. And 9 years later, he dies at the age of 70. Some people might say that David's ending is somewhat sad, perhaps. But I want you to listen to me. Stick with me through the end of this message, please. If you watch what he did in his life, it could remind you of something incredibly important, especially if you feel like there is no way on earth for your dreams to come true. Listen to me, the foundation of our faith, listen to me, the foundation of our faith in God is not answered or unanswered prayer. The foundation of our faith is not some happily ever after ending to whatever plans we have made. That is not the foundation of our faith. He is not our cosmic genie. We do not rub the magic Bible and poof, we get our 3 wishes. The foundation of our faith is Him. I'm just telling you from my own experience and watching other people, it is always a mistake for you to wrap your faith in God around the fulfillment of some dream. Your faith in God should not be wrapped up in the answer to your prayers. If your dreams don't come true, that says absolutely nothing about God's faithfulness or His ability to act. It says 0 about those things. That's why I would say one of the big takeaways that David's life gives to us is that we are mistaken when we assume that we are forsaken. Please, just get that through your heart. I think we would do well to be like David, to join David and be on Team David like so many of you already have and so many of you already declare. This is in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 25. I'll say it again. David said, if I find favor in the Lord's eyes, He will bring me back, but let Him do to me whatever seems good to Him. Because I am not depending on the circumstances. I am depending on Him. I may lose my world, but I will not lose my confidence in God. I want to be the kind of man who says, thy will, not my will. Can you pray that? I'm not sure I can pray it every day. I want to. Can you pray like David? I'm going to make the choice in this moment one more time, like I do nearly every day. I will choose not to abandon God, even if it appears that He has abandoned me. I don't want to see a show of hands, but I just want to know, because I'm trying to get to your heart this morning. Do you have any dreams that just crush you because you know they cannot come true? That's why I say you would do well to look at the shadow king, because he's trying to show you the light. I hope that David, and knowing some of these things about him, has inspired you. But don't miss the fact that you cannot have a shadow unless you've got a source of light. So who is the source of light? And why does this all hang together? Why are all these 66 documents in this collection? Why is it one cohesive story that leads to Jesus? Because Jesus is the light. And I'm not speaking metaphorically. I'm saying if you want to know what life is about, then go toward the light. Okay, 1,000 years later, Jesus and those who are closest to him, all 12 of the ones who are very close to him, including the one who's going to betray him, which is a whole other story in itself. They're all in the same ancient city of Jerusalem, in a second-story dining room. And Jesus says, you don't understand what's happening, because this was on a Thursday night before he'd be crucified on Friday. He said, you don't understand this, but just remember that I said it. This bread that we're breaking represents my body, because it's going to be broken in your place. And this juice, this wine that we're drinking, that represents my blood. And it's going to cover everything, and you're going to have a new opportunity to have a relationship with God, and I'm going to pay for it with my own life. They don't understand any of that. None of it. He speaks about being killed, and of course they're young guys, and all these young Turks is like, no, we're going to be good. It's good. He's like, okay, sure, whatever. And Luke records for us in Luke 22, says that after they had done all that and accompanied by the disciples, look what Jesus did. He left that upstairs room and he went as usual, because if you read the rest of Luke, you'll see Jesus spent a lot of time there. They went down the very steep embankment, the steep ravine, down and crossed over the Kidron Brook. And they went back up on the hill on the other side, which was known as Olive Mountain. But they went as usual to the Mount of Olives, and that's where Jesus knelt down and he prayed a prayer. And he said, Father, if you are willing, please take away this cup of horror from me. Because he knew what was coming. And then he said, but I want your will, not mine. I used these earlier in the series. And you could look at them as trophies, because if this represents the sword of Goliath and all the winning days, or the losing days, because he went and got it again. 80 some odd people died because of it. Or you take the day-to-day that he was a warrior that was extraordinary. And he can think of all the times whenever he did things that broke his heart. And all the times he won. Do you have any things that are burdens to you? And do you have any things that you say, that's a trophy? I think I did pretty good there. What I'm asking of you, church, is that if God is who he says he is, and we can trust him, then if I understand it correctly, what we're supposed to do is take all of our burdens and we lay them down. Because there's nobody else is going to help us like he helps us. And then if you have some sort of trophy, you didn't get there on your own. The very air you breathe. And you take that trophy and you say, if it wasn't for you, Jesus, I'd have nothing. That's why I put it in your notes. Maybe a prayer that you need to start getting in the habit of praying is like this. Heavenly Father, I offer you my dreams and my plans. Would you please do to me whatever seems good to you? But God, with all the sincerity I can muster, I acknowledge your right to rule. And just like my Jesus prayed, your will be done in me. Yeah, see, here's the thing. David prayed that kind of prayer, and that's inspirational. I hope you are inspired. But Jesus prayed it, and if you pray that kind of thing, then it becomes not inspirational, it becomes transformational. It will literally change the way you live your life. That when you go to work, God, I'm working to bless people, bless my family, and I need you to be in the middle of it so that I can actually see what's going on here. Whenever you're in retirement and you think you're washed up, you need to remember God has no retirement program. He's got a great relocation program, but he does not have a good retirement program. But I'm just telling you, you are not washed up. David showed the way. Jesus became the way. David was the shadow. Jesus is the light that casts the shadow. I hope you are picking up what I'm laying down. The light of the world. That's why I say invite people. I'm going to do all I can to put the cookies on the bottom shelf during Christmas so that people can know who Jesus is. All along, not just this message, I'm saying all along throughout history, God has been trying to get this message through to all of us. He has said, the reason I sent Jesus is because your sin has cost me everything. But he says, I'm not mad at you, I'm mad about you. That's what drove my son Jesus to die on a cross and to be buried in shame. But it is also why I sent him, so that he could be raised in power. Because the fact that Jesus lived a sinless life, died a sacrificial death, and rose from the dead, it is the resurrection that matters more than anything I can tell you. Because David was a king, and there have been lots of kings. There are even people who think they are kings today, but there is only one king, and it ain't Elvis. Jesus is the victor over death, sin, hell, and the grave. And either what he claimed to be and what he said was true, or he was lying, or he was completely out of his mind. You have to decide. Now, to wrap this up and put a bow on it, I'm just telling you, this is what God said of David. It is recorded in Acts as a part of a message that was given. In Acts 13, God said of David, he said, I have searched the land and found this David, son of Jesse. He is a man whose heart beats to my heart, a man who will do what I tell him. Gentlemen, if you want to know what God's after, that's what he's after. He wants to know that you are following him. See, David knew he was a king, but he never forgot who the real king was. I happen to have Jewish heritage in my married family, and we are sometimes when we celebrate Hanukkah, the prayer starts Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech. I can't remember the rest of it. I'm not very Hebrew, but what I know it says in English is, "Blessed are you, King of the universe." I'm just telling you, it's been there all along. In Acts 13, continuing in verse 36, about who Jesus is. This is what this message said. David, of course, I'm reading from the Message paraphrase. David, of course, having completed the work that God set out for him, has been in the grave, dust and ashes for a long time now. But the one, Jesus, the one God raised up, no dust and ashes for him. And he wants us to understand what he's saying right here. He says, I want you to know, my very dear friends, that it is on account of this resurrected Jesus that the forgiveness of your sins can be promised. You want to have freedom from your guilt? Come to Jesus. He accomplishes in those who believe everything that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy were trying to get to. He accomplishes in those who believe everything the law of Moses could never make good on. But everyone, listen, everyone who believes in him, who believes onto him, who believes this raised up Jesus is declared good and declared right and declared whole before Almighty God, King of the universe. Man. I got to ask you, do you believe that? Do you have the willingness to bow your knee to Jesus and stop being the king of your life and allow him to be? Can you do it with eyes wide open right now while I'm talking? You say, God, I'm going to trust that and I'm going to start aligning my life, because this goes back to what we said from the very beginning in Psalm 25 verses 1 and 5. In you, Lord my God, I put my trust. Why? Because my hope is in you. Only you. All day long. Every day. 24/7. 365. I'm going to pray. After that, we're going to wrap this up. It's going to be awesome. You're going to love it. Lord, please take what we have tried to just dig out of what your word says and what you were doing and how you were doing it. Would you help us to understand it, to know what we're supposed to do with it? Where does it land in our head and in our hearts? Because, God, you are doing something amazing. You do it every single time a person surrenders just another part, another piece, another step of their life. And when you do that, you're so faithful, you're so good, you give us salvation, you give us forgiveness and mercy and grace. You give us purpose. And you give us a confidence to be able to walk into the future, even when our dreams cannot come true. Lord, because of what we've heard here today and the decisions we've made, would you please use us to be brighter light and saltier salt? And may your kingdom grow. And I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.